Hello and welcome to the AviaDev Insight Africa Connectivity Update for October 2025. I am your host, John Howell, the CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We are the premier platform dedicated to supporting fleet and route development to, from, and within the sub-Saharan African region. This is, believe it or not, the 23rd episode of the Connectivity Update. I think Sean's been on every single one. Behramjee is now obviously part of the furniture, but wasn't there initially, right at the beginning. We started back in September 2023, so we've only missed 1 month, I was checking, which was August last year because I was on vacation, I think. But it's just been amazing. It's a real highlight of my month. It's a real great privilege to sit down with these guys and laugh and learn along with our guests. And I know that our audience really appreciates it and looks forward to it. You can't underestimate the amount of preparation and knowledge that's involved in the episode. And we wanted to bring something different to you. So thank you all for your support. And we're looking forward to another great edition. So as always, we've got some really meaty subjects. We've got some deep dives to get into today. But before that, as always, which is a nice surprise for my guests, I will do the introductions in a harnessing the power of somebody important and interesting. So this month, I'm channeling my inner Roger Foster, the recently retired MD and CEO of Airlink, because the airline is going to feature in today's episode. And there's some nice trivia around some of the registrations of the aircraft, which we'll get into as well. Here we go. Joining us first, as always, is Sean Mendis, an aviation consultant with expertise that spans everything from fleet management to route strategy, but always with a keen eye trained on the balance sheet and making pragmatic decisions. It's easy to get lost in the glamour of aviation, big planes, glitzy air show demonstrations, luxurious lounges and destinations and people that make you feel like royalty. But at the end of the day, it's that healthy balance sheet that keeps the engines running and the business in the air. Sean understands that the real flight path to success often starts in the accounting department. So sit back, relax, and prepare for some financial wisdom with a dash of humor as we navigate the skies of African aviation with Sean. Welcome, Sean. Good. All right. Our second guest is full-time lion ecologist and part-time aviation consultant, Behramjee Ghadially, who spent more time analysing fleets and routes than I have on the golf course. Behramjee has been helping airlines make mostly sensible fleet and route development decisions for years. Stop it, Sean. And isn't shy with his opinions on the right fleet or route choice. In aviation, making a wrong turn when it comes to a route decision or equipment choice can be fatal. And Behramjee brings his trademark mix of data-driven decision-making and long-term trend analysis to identify the path to success. So with our experts briefed and strapped in, it's time to start the taxi out for the October edition. As always, the disclaimer is that the opinions of my guests today are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of AviaDev. But with that said, let's get into the discussion. Okay, let's start with Airlink and with Embraer. So I want to start with the much awaited arrival of the first Embraer E2 195s in the Airlink fleet. The deal was first announced back in June. We mentioned it on the podcast, didn't go too deep into detail, but we're revisiting it because the first two aircraft have arrived last month in September. And the Airlink team has been in Brazil this week conducting some formalities with the team, with the lessor and with the Embraer guys over there. So I think what we'd like to understand is what's the lowdown, first of all, on what's arrived in terms of cabin configuration and what's been delivered so far. And then we can do a bit of speculation into how they will be used. So Sean, you kick us off on this one and then Behramjee can jump in.
Sure. Indeed, yes. Over the last 10 days or so, we've had the first two of, as you mentioned, Airlink has committed to taking 10 initially E2 195s. They're going to be factory fresh deliveries from Embraer, but they are leased through Azora. So the first two of, it's going to be a first batch of 3, and then there's going to be a second batch of 7. So the first two of that first batch of 3 are delivered now. That would be, you alluded to the registrations, and the registrations of the first two are ZS-ARF, which, needless to say, is a tribute to RF Roger Foster, the founder and longtime CEO. The second one is ZS-BJW, which is a tribute to Barry Webb, who is the second of the two founders of what subsequently became Airlink. And the third one is actually going to be, it has been registered as ZS LKA, which is a shout out to Link Airlines, which was actually one of the acquisitions that Roger and Barry had made to get into the scheduled service side and so forth. I was joking with someone at Airlink this week that the problem with Airlink is once you get past Roger and Barry, you're struggling for people in history in terms of what to go for, because Roger was just so much of the history of Airlink and success of Airlink in one person. But I do understand that after this, it's all going to be a sequential series allocated by South African CAA, so not special registrations planned at this time. But again, that is subject to change if they come up with any other ideas. But yeah, the interesting part about this, though, is that these first three airframes, which Airlink is taking delivery of, my understanding is that these three are actually in an all-economy configuration, 136 all-economy class seats, while the ones that are going to come in the middle of next year, so the deliveries are due to start second quarter 2026 of the next 7, and those are going to be in a 2-class, 12 business and 112 economy configuration. There's going to be very different mission profiles in terms of what Airlink plans to do with this. There's going to be the subfleet of these all-economy ones, which is going to be deployed most likely on domestic routes, which high density, where they're having to compete with SAA and SAF Air, and where their E-jets, their first generation E-jets, have struggled to deliver as low a cost per seat kilometer as they would have liked. So the E2 will give them the ability to come in with a competitive CASK against SAA for sure. Maybe not as low as SAF Air, but again, they've got a product where they're selling included bags and so forth that they don't necessarily need to be at that same level of CASK. And I think it's interesting because everyone, when they heard about Airlink going in for the E2, the focus was, oh, this is going to open up a whole range of new routes. And definitely it will, and I'm sure we'll get into that chatter, because that is where BG has been blowing up our WhatsApp group with all sorts of plans in terms of what they're doing. And I've got some info from them as well as from other sources in terms of what they're looking at. But the interesting point on this is there's actually two main objectives. One is to compete on the domestic market with a lower CASK, where they can compete with the narrow body competition at a comparable cost basis. And also, you also don't want to be launching a new route with the E2 as your first thing. This is while they've got a lot of experience running Embraer aircraft and obviously have a huge support, this is new engines, this is a new avionics suite, this is a new bunch of stuff out there, and you don't want to be flying into deep dark Africa as your first routes on this. So I think it is a prudent entry into service thing, and I think we will see these definitely in place by Christmas. The Christmas rush is going to see these as a supplementary capacity on the domestic market. But I think second quarter 2026, when they start taking deliveries of the aircraft with the 2-class LOPA, is when we'll see some of their new regional routes, which could use the E2 either for capacity or range, be taken over by the new aircraft deliveries. Another tidbit on this, and as I said, the first aircraft is ZS-ARF. But interestingly enough, the Airlink model aircraft, which they're displaying in their head office and which they featured the pictures of on their social media, that one is actually registered ZS-RAF, which is Roger's actual initials. But unfortunately, ZS-RAF is already registered for a Beach King Air in South Africa, so they had to go with ZS-ARF instead for the actual aircraft. But a little bit of tidbit, if you go to Airlink's office, you'll see ZS-RAF in the foyer over there rather than ZS-ARF, which is the actual plane.
Oh, that is niche trivia. I love that. But yeah, I did think that. I was like, why wouldn't RAF? It's obviously his initials. We also know, I think, from the routes perspective, that they've applied for some of the international routes already through the Air Service Council as well. But yeah, we can come back to that. I think I'd like to bring Behramjee in and say, look, do you agree that these first ones are going to be on those domestic? I think we know that, but then what should they be doing when they get the next set, which of course they have more say on the configuration, which will have the business and the economy split. So yeah, over to you.
Thank you, John. Firstly, with regards to the Embraer E2 flying range capability, I think flying out of Cape Town, because it's at sea level, that will enable the airline to exploit the aircraft's flying range to its full potential compared to Johannesburg's high altitude. So from Cape Town, according to my calculations, the furthest that it can fly is Lagos and Accra, which are about 6 hours, 20 minutes block time. I would say Cape Town, Lagos would be a no-brainer for route for them. Nobody flies that route currently non-stop. The market is there. It's 38,000 passengers over the last year, and the average fare currently is $500 one way with IQ included. So that route, I would say 3 times a week, overnight flying to increase utilization, I would say is a no-brainer. But there are some other routes also which make sense, which are more closer to Cape Town, which they do not fly currently. Number one, I would say Osaka Cape Town is about a 3 hour, 15-minute flying flight, and it had 42,000 passengers last year. Again, in order to increase utilization, it can be flown overnight. It doesn't have to be a daytime flight. That is a good route for sure. Another one which Sean may agree with me, though the statistics are 50-50, is Cape Town to Accra, where the market demand is not so high. It's only 12,000 passengers, but the yields are quite good, $600 one way. But the advantage that Airlink will have flying from Cape Town to Lagos and Accra is that it won't be targeting point-to-point demand only. It will be feeding entire domestic South Africa, plus a few regional routes as well. So we shouldn't look at it just if they launch Lagos and Accra, it won't be solely focusing on point-to-point. It will be focusing on both aspects, point-to-point and feeding domestic South Africa and a little bit of regional Southern Africa as well. Few other routes that could be launched from Cape Town along with these three cities. Dar es Salaam is about a 5 hour, 20-minute flight from Cape Town, and it has 14,000 passengers last year flying point to point. Again, the market between South Africa and Dar es Salaam is quite big, so they would also focus on that incremental connections. Livingston, which is close by to Cape Town, that's 10,000 passengers point to point, and they would also get some fee. But I think Livingston is not meant to be a E95 route because the market demand is not so great. Livingston is more suited to be a E.
And they're already flying Vic Falls, which is 20 minutes drive from Livingston across the border. It's not like that market is not being served. They're just serving the Zim side from Cape Town rather than the Zam side.
But Livingston is not an E95 size market. It's more of a E75, E90 size market at the very most. And yeah, those are the routes which look a bit promising to me for the long term. One thing though I would like to say is, though Airlink has ordered 10 units initially, I foresee them increasing that to at least 20 units within the next 3 to 4 years, because they've got 29 E90s, some of which need to be replaced sooner rather than later, and also they need to be more competitive on a cost per seat basis on the trunk routes within domestic South Africa. So I definitely do see an incremental order of 10x incremental units being placed within the next 2 to 3 years.
And a lot of that, yeah, and like you say, some of that though is more just replacement rather than actual growth. I think the thing that's really interesting that you picked up on there is almost Cape Town becoming the hub for the E1, the 5, the E2, really, rather than talking about this out of Joburg. How do you see that, Sean? Because all the routes Behramjee talked about is Cape Town ex Africa.
And we're going to actually see very different, because I am almost certain that their first E2 regional route, once they are up and running with the E2 on the domestic, is going to be Zanzibar, Joburg to Zanzibar, because they filed for multiple routes. The only two routes they filed for out of Cape Town as new routes when they filed with the Air Services Council earlier this year is Accra and Lagos. And I'll come back and I'll talk about those. But Joburg to Zanzibar, almost certainly, we know from people on the ground in Zanzibar, we know from people on the ground in Joburg, we know from Airlink themselves, we know from a number of different sources that is actually going to be their priority. And AviaDev in Zanzibar was a big driver of that to push it over the line on a market that's always been of interest to South African carriers, and that has been a market that is growing. And we'll come back and we'll talk a lot about Zanzibar, I think, in this podcast as well, given they're always in the news with some new route route or some increase or something like that. In addition to that, I expect them to be doing Joburg to Mauritius. I don't think that may be year-round or daily or whatever else, but I think there is enough demand in that market where the E1 is struggling a bit to make that. The E2 would probably be able to make it, but I think that one is going to have a bit of an ETOPS challenge, which they're going to need to certify on that before they can actually launch that. And coming back to those Cape Town routes, I think Cape Town to Lagos is going to happen some point. We know that, how do I put this? Cape Town to Lagos it's about 2,500 nautical miles, give or take. It's just slightly longer than Joburg to Lagos, which is something that we've seen the E2 in its first generation. And I call it first generation E2 because Embraer has made a few tweaks in terms of the software and the engine rating, which has increased the range marginally since then. But the first generation, which Air Peace operated from Joburg to Lagos, was able to operate that with slight payload restrictions. But from Joburg, with altitude and so forth, Embraer believes at this point of time, and I've had this long discussion with Embraer this past week where I said I want to be convinced that the E2 has the ability to do this before I go on the podcast and say, yes, Cape Town to Lagos is actually feasible. And I discussed this with Airlink, I discussed with Embraer. Neither side believes that range is going to be an issue from Cape Town to Lagos. They are confident and they've given real-world examples in terms of performance that the E2 is capable of hitting 2,900 nautical miles, including reserves. 2,536, I think, is the distance from Cape Town to Lagos. It's pretty much a straight shot. There's no airspace deviations or anything else, so that's straight up there. Accra becomes a little trickier because the direct route from Accra requires a lot of flying over water, and again, that requires an ETOPS and so forth. And southbound from Accra into Cape Town is where you're actually going to run into more of an issue. Accra is a sea level departure, but Cape Town's location right now, and until the Cape Winelands airport opens up and so forth, the alternate for Cape Town is a very long alternate. You're looking at PE or George or something, probably George for an aircraft this size, but otherwise you're even looking at PE or Joburg for wide bodies and narrow bodies. And consequently, your reserve fuel that you're carrying is actually going to eat into what you can actually carry in terms of payload coming into Cape Town. So I actually see that the challenge is going to be Accra into Cape Town rather than Cape Town going north. I think Lagos is doable both ways. And again, this is rough back of the envelope calculations. I know that I'm going to have one particular friend at Airbus who's going to be messaging me at the end of this because he always does every time I mention Cape Town and Lagos, and here's a shout out to him, who shall remain nameless, but I know that this is a battle. But honestly, I've really chatted this up in great detail with both Airlink and Embraer, and I'm confident enough that Cape Town to Lagos is doable with zero or minimal payload restrictions pretty much most of the year. That said, a lot of the other routes which Behramjee is talking about, none of those really require the E2. I think the benefits of the E2 are threefold. Number one, capacity. It has a very limited number of 195s themselves right now. Their backbone of their E-jet fleet is the 190, which is smaller. So adding more aircraft, adding more seats into an aircraft, especially these high-density Y136 LOPA aircraft that they're starting on initially, takes it to a very different level. Y136 is almost as many seats as SAA has on their A320s. So you're talking about a much lower trip cost with a similar cost basis to sell it across. So it's an interesting number over there, but I think that's point one is capacity. Point two is operating costs. Operating costs of this aircraft is going to be a lot cheaper than the trip cost at least, and unit cost is going to be a lot cheaper than the first generation E-jets that they're operating. So that gives them that advantage. Now certainly part of that is offset by the ownership costs. These are not going to come cheap, even though Azora is probably offering them a very good deal. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first time Airlink is actually taking a factory fresh aircraft probably in my lifetime or close to it. Airlink has built their entire fleet for the most part on pre-owned, pre-loved, good condition aircraft with a very solid maintenance organization of their own to support this. So I think that's a very big difference in terms of how Airlink is approaching it. And it's a luxury they have now that Qatar Airways is one of their shareholders. That is a big change over there. But I think the third important point for them, and this is third in that order for them, is range. Certainly, they've wanted to enter some of these markets. I think Cape Town to Lagos is a perfect example. Zanzibar is another one. But there are very few routes in Africa that an E2 can do that an E1 wasn't able to. If you look at the range map, going from South Africa south, you're just talking about can you reach Antarctica or not, so there's really not much there. Going east, Mauritius is about on the edge of where you could go, but there's not much else that they don't. They're already flying to Madagascar, so it's Reunion and Mauritius. Nothing else is opened up by the E2. You're going west, they're already flying to the middle of the ocean in St. Helena, which is about the only place they can go to. So there's really not much they can go west. So the reality is it's only how far north can they go. And the differential between, say, a Libreville, which is about the limit of where an E1 can go, and a Lagos, the number of markets in that range are a tiny handful. So you're maybe talking 3 or 4 new markets that might open up, but for the most part, what you're opening up is large swathes of the Congo jungle. And I don't quite see them opening to Bangui or one of these things, one of those airports which may be opened up by this. So certainly, while there will be a few routes, and I think those will get a lot of the press in terms of it, Airlink's strategy in going for the E2 is not about new routes and range. The strategy is going to be about the costs and efficiency that the E2 brings over the first generation E1. And it's a logical match. Personally, I think I even mentioned this in one of the earlier podcasts. We know this. We know from talking to Roger, and I've mentioned this with Roger, and I think even when I had Roger on my panel in Cape Town a couple of years ago, one of the questions was, how are you competing with larger narrow bodies? And Roger's always said that Airlink, as they become a bigger player in the domestic market, has to upgauge. So the question of upgauging has never really been the issue. The question, I think, when Qatar came in as the shareholder was whether Qatar would send some of their surplus aircraft over to there. Ironically, Qatar actually has some former Qatar Airways aircraft now operating for South African Airways. And if you fly on South African Airways and some of these aircraft in business class, you actually have the Qatar Airways logo on the in-flight entertainment because they haven't been able to reprogram them yet to the SAA. So, well, Qatar Airways owns part of Airlink. You could fly on Airlink's competitor, South African Airways, and get a Qatar Airways logo, which Qatar finds very amusing and South African Airways slightly less.
More amazing trivia. I think a really good deep dive there. I just wanted to do a bit of a shout out because AviaDev this year, we released 2 reports, one with Embraer, one with Airbus. That was the second edition of the Airbus report, looking at to and from Africa, but also within, looking at the top routes. And Embraer did a report as well. And I'll put the links in the show notes so people can have a read. But of course, Cape Town, Lagos is really high up there. And one of the airlines that's done very well on this that I think came across in the Airbus report as well was TAG. People were connecting through Angola to get up to Lagos. So that's going to be tricky for them because, of course, if you've got the choice, you're going to potentially do a direct flight as and when this comes online. So it can change the dynamic. But I think that the messaging that you've told us today is they're not all just for growth. A lot of this allows them to do some replacement work as well, but also improve the efficiency and the economics so they can compete with some of the other players who are operating larger gauge aircraft. Safair's got a 737-800 fleet. It's a lot of seats, 189 seats, right, on each aircraft. That's a lot of seats to compete with if you've got a 90-plus seater. And the final thing, and I'll come back to you, Behramjee, for the last thing, but the final thing for me is just what an amazing job. I know the Embraer team, since the E2 was announced, the amount of meetings and work they will have done, and there are too many people to mention by name, but they know who they are. Some still with the organisation, some that have moved on, but they should all be the whole team, the Airlink team as well. It's been a real team effort to get this to happen, and all these things have aligned. The Qatar investment, like you say, Sean, the need, the opportunity to take these aircraft. There's so many things, so it is monumental, and the first factory fresh Airlink plane after all these years of operation. Again, what a lesson, 35 plus years of Airlink, and it's the first time they've had a brand new factory fresh aircraft. Kudos to everyone, really.
Note from Embraer's perspective as well, that it's actually going into a blue chip operator who will use it appropriately. The unfortunate problem with the E2 is that its launch customer in Africa was Airpeace, who, for various reasons, 5 of their aircraft have been AOG. In fact, they've only got 1 running right now after this. These are brand new factory fresh planes, which are now factory fresh paperweights, and that is not a good advertisement for the E2 for not entirely reasons linked to Embraer or to Airpeace. A lot of this was engine-related things and poor maintenance planning to go with it. But I think Airlink will have a much better reliability. Anybody would have a much better reliability record than Airpeace in those E2s. But I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out for Airlink. But just looking at Airlink's track record and looking at the E2, which is a remarkable aircraft, which has finally seen the success it deserves this year, with a lot of orders from a lot of players around the world. And I think Airlink is one of the success stories for Embraer, and seeing them now flying Embraer's flagship product is kudos to both Airlink and Embraer.
Perfect. Last word on this, Behramjee, back to you.
Yes, I was wanting to say that if Airlink ends up launching Cape Town, Lagos, it will help Embraer's PR a lot because they can really market this aircraft's potential flying range to a great extent. So not only would Airlink benefit from operating that route, but Embraer's marketing and PR would also take a huge positive turn. So they can really exploit that to their benefit.
Yep. Great point.
Honestly, Cape Town to Lagos, I don't see a matter of if, I see it as a matter of when. I think from my conversations with people at Airlink, I think their concern is not even as much as the range, but in terms of other intangibles in markets like that, such as, obviously, it's a different size aircraft that people are used to flying to South Africa. Is the market positive response going to be to a 2-2 config aircraft? Look, I don't think that'll be as much of an issue because the E2 cabin is really nice. But baggage over there, certainly baggage, it has the ability to carry 2 bags of passenger, but it is marginal when you start looking at Nigerian traders and so forth. So I think their concerns are more in terms of product rather than in terms of aircraft performance and capability in that respect. And I think, as I said, on the capability and this, I have spent this entire week. You've seen some of my conversations. I have quizzed Embraer. I have quizzed Airlink. I have gone through this with them to try and determine, is this aircraft capable of doing it? They have provided real-world examples. I am confident that this aircraft can do it. And I know that if they're providing them to me, they're providing them to others who are looking to buy it as well. So I don't think Embraer really needs to prove that as much. I think it will be an interesting thing to determine whether a larger regional jet or a small narrow body, I think, as the E2 really should be known, because I think it's outgrown the regional jet moniker now in terms of its performance and size. So a small narrow body like the E2 or the A220, is that really going to be the future of African aviation by opening up these longer thin routes, or is it going to be where Africa continues to cling to the big plane good, small plane bad kind of mentality that has stunted African aviation for decades, unfortunately?
Yeah, and I just have to say that Airbus like to say single aisle, not narrow body. That's their thing. That's what they like to shout out to the marketing team there, because that's their positioning. I have to put that in, Sean, that's all. No, it's great. It's great. And that's hopefully a really good insight. And what we're now going to have is some of those sound bites we can play back to you guys in the future when, of course, the team here are proved right about how these aircraft are going to be utilized. So, yeah, exciting times and a really positive story to start. So let's get into some of the route developments. So the first one, we're going to head over to East Africa, and hot on the heels of Flynas, who launched Riyadh-Nairobi flights yesterday on the 2nd of October as we're recording. That is a route obviously been discussed on the pod previously. Flydubai have announced a new route from Dubai to Nairobi starting on the 15th of October 2025. It's going to be 4 times a week, and it's going to complement their existing Mombasa flight, which is also now going to become a daily service from the 1st of October. I did interview the team there when they launched the Mombasa route a couple of years ago, or I'm not sure how long ago it was, 18 months ago or something, for the podcast. So it's good to hear that obviously it's performing well enough that they've increased the frequency. So what's the story here? Behramjee, you want to start us on this one?
Sure. With regards to Flydubai announcing Nairobi, it seems more of a more of a way of Emirates gaining a stronger foothold into Nairobi, as well as a reaction to the excess capacity being dumped into Nairobi unjustifiably by other GCC carriers. We've heard Airways increase capacity quite a bit from the onset of this winter season. We know Etihad is increasing to a double daily service from the end of this month. We know that Gulf Air has opened a new route to Bahrain after 10 years. Flynas announced Nairobi, and now Flydubai is coming to Nairobi. Flydubai will obviously code-share with Emirates on this route. As of now, the Flydubai flights are departing Dubai at 4:30 or 4:40 in the evening and arriving back into Dubai at 4:30 in the morning. So it's a 12-hour rotation, more or less. It connects very well to the Emirates hub wave banks in particular. The 4:30 arrival back into Dubai connects with their 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock departure hub wave bank to Europe, GCC, and Asia, as well as certain North American destinations. And the 1600 departure Hubway Bank from Dubai also connects very well with Emirates Asia, Indian subcontinent, and selective North American destinations. As far as Flydubai is concerned, using the 738 MAX on this route is a low risk proposition. They don't have any other aircraft types larger than that, except for the M9. The point-to-point market size between Dubai and Nairobi last year was 189,000 passengers, out of which Emirates has 68% market share, whilst Kenya Airways has 25% market share only. It is also worth pointing out that the Emirates average fare on Nairobi-Dubai is 28% higher than Kenya Airways. And the main reason for that is Emirates has more of the premium cabin traffic versus KQ on this route. With regards to Mombasa increasing, Mombasa-Dubai is a much smaller market. The yields are half of what Nairobi is for obvious reasons, because it's purely a leisure-oriented route with a little bit of VFR traffic. Mombasa-Dubai was 30,000 passengers only, point to point. They're increasing Mombasa from 4 weekly to daily, but the departure time is a split schedule. It departs Dubai at 9 o'clock, half the flights in the morning, and the other half of the flights depart Dubai at 1600. So again, mainly Mombasa also is catering towards the Emirates Hubway banks, as the point-to-point market is not that big for it to be sustained. So with the help of the Emirates network, this has obviously been done so that they can provide a more competitive product versus their GCC rivals in particular, what I feel.
Great. Yeah, Nairobi's such a hotspot. It seems it's every month we've got conversations about new flights. It's scary for KQ.
Yeah.
Some people
exactly. And I think a big chunk of the reason why Nairobi is becoming such a popular thing right now is because people are sensing the blood in the water. They've seen KQ is struggling. KQ's got a bit of weakness, and Nairobi is a large market with O&D. It is a tourist destination. It's a source market, especially to the Middle East for labor traffic and so forth. And the weaker that KQ is, and as long as ET remains unable to add their third daily flight into Nairobi, which has now been pending for 3 years, they're in a situation where the African carrier gets shut out, but the Middle East carriers just can add infinite capacity effectively into Nairobi. And I think Kenya needs to have a very close look in terms of whether this suits themselves. I know they're saying we'll keep ET out to protect KQ, or they keep ET out because processes must be followed and all the other ridiculous nonsense that Kenya likes to spew while they hypocritically pretend to embrace SATAM while ignoring its principles on the other hand. But at the same time, you have to look at it and say, KQ is struggling. KQ will have to reinvent itself, and they did well for a while. They're struggling for a while. Maybe they can reinvent themselves again. But as it stands right now, this kind of stuff it's not designed necessarily because they see Nairobi as this market of infinite growth. It's because they see this market as a potential to grab a larger market share from a carrier which may not be in its death throes, but definitely in its deathbed.
Yeah, which is, frightening times for all involved. I think I saw something this morning about this, about what's good for Kenya, etc. So there is discussion in the press and at this level, but it's really a case of, can you have it both ways? Can you have a sustainable national carrier in an incredibly open market where capacity is being dumped in? As Behramjee said, there's some of the airlines are really stretching themselves thin and putting in so much capacity. But you've said, Sean, it's strategic rather than profit making.
Designed for profit making in the long term. It's strategic in the short term in terms that you've got to buy the market share. And I think Qatar in particular, we alluded to this multiple times over the year, but Qatar's entire Africa strategy, which came about during COVID, was buy market share and then consolidate it later. And it's worked for them in many markets. It hasn't worked in others, but they've gotten their foot into the door in a few years where by organic growth that have taken them a decade or more. So when they see the opportunity, their strategy, which has been proven, has been go in strong, go in really double down, triple down, quadruple down even. And we've seen that. They're more than doubling their Nairobi capacity this season. And we're seeing the Emirates Group through adding frequencies to that. Now, certainly Emirates Group was the largest player anyway in that market with their multiple daily wide bodies. So 4 more narrow bodies is not more than a symbolic thing. But again, as Behramjee alluded to, the schedule, it just creates more schedules and direct competition and creates more options than the home carrier in KQ is able to match. And with Mombasa as well. Remember, KQ also attempted Mombasa to Dubai for a while, which they then also had to pull out of because, quite honestly, they couldn't compete head-to-head with Flydubai. It's next to impossible to compete with these guys head-to-head. With KQ's bloated cost structure and with the unlimited capital that the Middle Eastern carriers effectively have, especially in contrast to KQ, who struggles to make ends meet.
So just on this, there's been lots of discussion about what next. And in their project, in their plan, was to get a strategic investor. And we know that's the conversation that's happening. Is this the only way out now for KQ, is to actually get some investment, get some partnership with one of these players that's coming in? And if so, who would it be? Because we've heard rumors of the team is over here, they're talking to different parties. Is there appetite from the Middle East? Because we saw this with Air Mauritius, that there was all this conversation around Qatar, and Qatar, no, we've not said this. Somebody's just made up the story. Like, how much truth and what's going to happen with KQ? Is this the way out, is to find a strategic investor and make it a Middle Eastern carrier, just like Airlink has? But obviously Airlink was bought into and was a profitable airline in its own right with a sustainable fleet, and KQ's had its problems with aircraft on the ground and engineering issues. Like, we're obviously going to watch this closely, but if you want to weigh into that and see what you think is the way out, I suppose.
As long as Qatar is going to be partnered with RwandAir, and that is the never-ending debate. Yes, what's the best analogy to put into this? Ross and Rachel from Friends. They were on a break, but now they're back together, and maybe they're not, and so forth. But as long as that's happening, it's going to be very difficult for them to commit to KQ. Now, certainly there is a strategic partnership which was signed, and then nothing ever happened, at least yet, between Qatar Airways and KQ. Could that translate into it? I think the dynamics are very different with Airlink. Airlink was a private sector carrier in which there's the minority 25% stake being taken. If that's going to happen in a Kenya Airways context, the fact that the government would remain, or at least would be close to the majority or the largest shareholders, still means that control would not actually vest. So you're becoming a piggy bank rather than a strategic investor, which is not the case in Airlink, where there is an actual governance system, where Hendrik is on the board of Airlink representing Qatar and so forth. There is Airlink has an influence, but not necessarily control over Qatar has an influence, but not actually control over how Airlink operates. That may not necessarily be the case in KQ, given KQ's debt, which is guaranteed by government, given there's a lot of baggage at KQ with that. Plus the fact that if they get into bed with Rwanda next door, you can't marry two sisters. That is frowned upon even in the most liberal African traditions. Two sisters often do not make the best in the single household. So I think that may be one of the challenges there. We will see. But KQ, I think I've said this to people at KQ, they are in an existential crisis, and they need to they have been taking it seriously for a while. They know that their backs have been against the wall. They thought they turned the corner, but unfortunately they hadn't. Yeah. They're talking
about these two 737s from Argentina. Is that right? That was KQ, wasn't it?
Yeah.
All I will say is, if I'm putting money down right now on KQ being around at this time next year in its current avatar, not to say it's never going to just completely go away, but I think it may, as you say, a strategic investor, an acquisition, some sort of complete radical shutdown or change of some divisions on it. I would say that by this time next year, if they have not come up with one of these radical changes or capital infusions or something like that, they will be a lot closer to that than they are right now.
Okay, great. Final word on this, Behramjee, because I think you've wanted to say a couple of bits.
Yes, with regards to KQ attracting, or the Kenyan government making KQ an attractive investment, I think the only way it could be an attractive investment for any businessman or business entity is if what happened with Air India is pulled off with KQ. What I mean is that the government has to write off the debt and sell the carrier with no legacy debt. Because whoever wants to end up buying KQ, they will not want to be responsible for their historical legacy debt at all, because it wasn't their fault to begin with. So that's the only thing I have to say on that.
Behramjee, there's a big difference though, and the difference is that Air India was a 100% state-owned carrier, while KQ is nominally a private sector carrier where the state is the largest shareholder but not a majority control shareholder. So KQ is actually a private company whose debt is guaranteed by government, who happens to also be a shareholder because they had to buy out other shareholders in the last but one bailout that happened. So it's a much more complex thing. You can't quite do it. The government does not have the control to be able to say, this is what we're going to do. That was the case in Air India. KQ is a mess in its governance structure, in its history, in everything else. It has sprawled into this web of links and KLM Air France partnerships and equity bought back and sold. And it's not going to be a simple thing to do. If someone wanted to come in right now and buy 100% of KQ, it'll be very hard to even make that transaction work because of the debt, who it's owed to, how it's guaranteed, and everything else. So
it's a bit of a tangle.
I don't envy them at all.
Okay, we'll watch this space on this one. And just a really quick aside, because you wanted to bring this up, Sean. KQ this month, there's a little niche.
Yes, they have a new route. It's not actually a new route. It's a new direction for an old route. And here's an interesting bit of trivia. Despite the fact that Malawi is surrounded on three sides effectively by Mozambique, there has not been a single air route currently operating for the last many years between Mozambique and Malawi. There has been a route between Malawi and Mozambique, but it only ran directionally. And that was KQ, who used to run Nairobi, Lilongwe, Nampula, Nairobi. And in fact, I flew that when I came to AviaDev in Nairobi a couple of years ago, and we were AOG in Nampula for a couple of hours.
I remember that.
Yes, on a brilliant KQ Embraer with an APU problem. But anyway, I digress. But what KQ has actually done now, so they run they used to run this daily Nairobi, Lilongwe, Nampula, Nairobi flight, and sold tickets from Lilongwe to Nampula. But if you wanted to come back from Nampula to Lilongwe, you had to go Nampula, Nairobi, Lilongwe. What they're doing now is they've reversed it 2 days of the week. So 5 days of the week, it still flies Lilongwe, Nampula, but as an experiment, they're flying Nairobi, Nampula, Lilongwe on 2 days of the week. And consequently now, for the first time in many years, in fact, honestly, it's longer than I've been living in Malawi. For the first time, you're able to actually have a round trip purchasable non-stop between Mozambique and Malawi, and because they're flying Nampula to Lilongwe as well as Lilongwe to Nampula. So it's a very niche, very tiny, not even a new route, but a new direction of an old route. But some positive news out of KQ for a change, and very positive news for those of us in Malawi needing to go to Nampula, I think, which may be 370 something passengers a year, but hey, every little bit counts.
Every little helps. Okay, great. Let's move to another carrier in East Africa, which is Air Tanzania. So this week's been quite busy, actually. We had a couple of late additions. So we saw the promotion and the announcement. I think we knew it was coming because they'd said this quite publicly, but they announced Accra 3 times a week from January 2026. I think the question here is, what do we know about this and what's the demand, but also how does it complement the new Lagos service? Because obviously it's in the same part of the world. So Behramjee, you want to start us off on this one?
Oh, sure. I was a bit surprised. Yesterday only I got to know of this route. Sean had messaged on our group. I was not aware that they were going to be flying non-stop to Accra, that to a terminator service. I would have expected it to be linked with something, preferably Nigeria, in the initial stage. But apparently they feel they don't need to do that. The demand between Dar es Salaam and Accra over the last year was 11,666 passengers round trip. So quite a small market for a medium haul flight, which would be around 5 hours. The one-way fare is quite decent though, $456 one way with YQ included. They will obviously be targeting transit traffic if the flight schedule connects with their regional network and Dubai. I've not checked that, to be honest with you, so I cannot say if it would or not. But if it does not connect with the high volume markets, then the load factor will be very low. Sean, I did not check. Are they flying a 220 or a 737 MAX 9 on it?
They have not loaded the flights for sale yet. They've simply put out advertising saying 3 times a week starting January, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. My expectation is, just given their aircraft utilities right now, is that they will schedule the MAX 9 and then they will use whatever the hell they feel like on a given day, because that's largely what they've been doing with Dubai, with Johannesburg, with Mumbai, with everyone else. It's just been a mix of everything. In Johannesburg, you could see a 220 one day and a 787 the next, even though 737 is scheduled. Yeah, that kind of tells you. If the Dash 8 could fly, they'd probably send the Dash 8 there as well. Because, look, this is not an airline that runs on the basis of a coherent commercial strategy. If you ask them, why are you starting Accra, they will say because it was in the plan. Now, why was it in the plan? Or somebody else did the plan? I have no idea. So, yeah, that's pretty much the way planning works at Air Tanzania. Have map, must fly, have planes. I'm just glad to see they're making use of those planes, but the poor Tanzanian taxpayer is going to have to pick up the considerable losses that they're going to incur from the Accra route as well as the Lagos route, because it's going to be very difficult for them to, as you pointed out, the O&D market share, the O&D market is not large, neither from Accra nor from Lagos. For them to buy market share on connecting markets, and the likely connecting markets they're going to have to target will not even be Dubai, because Dubai, as I said, they've largely downgraded to the 220 now. So where it was 787 and 737 initially, it is now 220. And I think that just shows that market has not been performing. It's going to be Johannesburg and Mumbai are going to be the two markets that they're most likely going to target for connections out of Accra. Probably Johannesburg, because given the days of the week, they're currently running Lagos Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If Accra comes in Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, will largely match that schedule, and that schedule is designed to feed to and from Johannesburg. So my guess is that it's going to primarily be targeted on Johannesburg, with connections some days of the week into Mumbai. I don't know if those days of the week match up perfectly for Mumbai, though. We'll see when that final schedule is announced, and that's going to be way too much competition. Remember, SAA is also increasing Accra to Johannesburg over the Christmas peak. They're going to take that up to 6 times a week on the 330 from the current 4. They've got the high-fly A330 wet lease, which is going to run until March, and then they're hoping to have their own A330s in by March as well. So I wouldn't be making those decisions, but then again, I'm conservative, and they're neither conservative nor liberal in this respect or anything. I don't think they understand the risks. They just do.
Okay. Yeah, so not too much to talk about, because we talked about the Lagos flight and we've analysed that, and it's not massively different.
There's no analysis to do, John. There genuinely is no analysis to do, because there is no logical reason why anybody would do this. You can't really say that they have a strategic advantage here, they have that over there. No, they have planes which were ordered for them by government because somebody somewhere was making a buck on it. And I'm not saying this out of the top of my head. I'm saying this based on Auditor General reports, because I know they like to say at Air Tanzania that I've got a buggy answer. It's not me. I'm just quoting your Auditor General. Your Auditor General is the guy who called you a criminal enterprise, not me. I'm just the one who's taken a platform and made that a wider thing out there. So this is an airline who their own country, their own government says has no clue how to run itself. And it's very difficult to attribute logic to decisions which are not made on the basis of logic. And Air Tanzania is a poster child. RwandAir used to be that. RwandAir has professionalized itself. It shows that there is an ability to make yourselves a bit more professional, to run yourselves in the right way once you have the assets, once you have the expertise and so forth. And RwandAir might be a good thing. Certainly they're not yet making money, but they're losing a lot less money than they would have had they not chosen to try and professionalize themselves. So there's hope for Air Tanzania. I'm not quite sure when they might turn that corner. People have been hopeful for the last 30 years, and every reinvention winds up being worse than the next.
Well, leave your phone on. Don't leave it on silent, Sean, because you never know. They might be ringing you soon, or you, Behramjee. Who knows? Behramjee, last word on this.
I've got the CEO on my WhatsApp. He's welcome to drop me a message, but he tends not to, because I rarely say anything positive about them.
Okay, fair enough. Let's sort of park that one.
You
but
mean
anything, last thing for you, Behramjee? The new one.
The new CEO,
the new one.
Okay.
The new one.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, Tanzania and Ghana, visas are easy to get for each other's country? Or is it like Nigeria?
I think it's visa-free both ways.
Okay.
I think it's visa-free both ways, or visa on arrival or whatever. But yeah, it's
so not the same problem they have with the Lagos route, which we talked about.
No, not an issue with Nigeria, with Ghana at all. Ghana and Tanzania have very open and easy travel for the two.
Okay, good. So they can stimulate point to point at least.
There's the potential to stimulate, but you know what? Dar es Salaam is not a destination that lends itself easily to stimulation. If they were trying to stimulate Zanzibar or tourist traffic or something like that, I could see that. But have you been to Dar?
No.
It's nothing wrong with it, but just getting from the airport at the wrong time of day to the parts of Dar that might be considered interesting can take you 2 hours on a bad day. And yeah, it's a city that has a lot of personality. I love it for that reason. It reminds me a lot of the Indian coastal cities and places like that. It's got personality, but that traffic, and it's just not a fun place to be. I've had a choice of picking a vacation in Dar or staying home. I'd probably stay home.
Let's do a nice vacation destination, and this is one for you, Behramjee, which is back to AviaDev's 2025 host destination, Zanzibar. Loads of developments here. Zanzibar, very beautiful. And the big new announcement, which we saw since the last recording, is that Etihad are going to start flying to Zanzibar 4 times a week from the 14th of June 2026. So obviously not till next year.
Seasonally.
So it is a seasonal flight. It starts in June next year, 4 times a week. Behramjee, what's the analysis? What's your thoughts?
It's going to be a quite detailed analysis, but some interesting observations. Firstly, Etihad started this route originally in 2022, and for obvious reasons, with their past experience with Africa, this route failed within the first year, and it was suspended in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, Sean. They are attempting to redo this experiment, but in a less risk fashion by just flying it on a summer seasonal basis using A320 Neo from Abu Dhabi. The schedule calls for a 9 o'clock departure from Abu Dhabi and a return flight back arriving at midnight, just past midnight, and the aircraft will stay on the ground for 4 hours in Zanzibar. The schedule obviously seems to be catered towards connecting Europe in both directions. And once again, I feel this is where they're not learning from their past mistakes on this. If you look at, we're going to now analyze what their nearest competitors do on this route. And you'll get to know why, even though Qatar Airways and Flydubai fly to Zanzibar, they don't have even 1/3 of the traffic that Ethiopian Airlines has on this route. Because from the statistics available, passengers, the fares are more or less the same of Qatar, Flydubai, Emirates, Coach Flydubai, and Ethiopian Airlines into Zanzibar from Europe. But passengers prefer the convenience of flying via Addis Ababa because it's much shorter. So to start off with, let's look at their nearest competitor, Qatar Airways. The biggest market for Qatar Airways into Zanzibar was their home market, Doha, point to point, 9,000 passengers. Whereas their top 5 connecting markets beyond Doha were Paris, 8,000 passengers, London, 5,000, Frankfurt, 5,000, Copenhagen, 4,000, and Dusseldorf, 3,000 each respectively. So the top 5 markets from Europe in total was 13, 18, 21, 25,000 passengers, and Qatar Airways operates a daily flight into Zanzibar. In comparison, Flydubai, which operates a double daily service into Zanzibar, their top market was their home market of Dubai, 30,000 passengers, and their top European markets in codeshare with Emirates, because Emirates also feeds that flight into Zanzibar a lot. Their number 1 market was Milan Bergamo, which is not surprising considering the historical high demand on this OND. 11,000 passengers for Bergamo. Followed, number 2 is London, 10,000 passengers. Number 3 is a shocking one for me, as well as it'll be for Sean and for you, John.
They're always shocking for me because I got no idea, right?
Yeah. Budapest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that's a pure Flydubai connection, Budapest to Zanzibar. And number 4.
And I'm sure you'll see Warsaw up there, the various Polish points, Eastern European points. We know this. These are When you
Russia
had
is there.
Flydubai on the podcast, that was largely what they said is, yes, certainly the Dubai market is the number one, but Flydubai's strength in Eastern in particular
Europe.
was a big driver of this. And I think this was before Russia got excommunicated as well. I think
just on that, the impact of Wizz Air Abu Dhabi not happening, that must have an impact in some way, because
Wizz Air Abu Dhabi was a basket case to start off with.
Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced Wizz Air Abu Dhabi is a positive or a negative. It's just is again.
Yeah. Okay. So apart from that, then you have Paris in codeshare with Emirates, 7,000 passengers. Naples, a Flydubai route by itself, 6,000 passengers. And then Moscow, Munich, Brussels, each with 5,000 passengers. So if you add that up for Flydubai with Emirates, for just the European market, these were 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These 10 European markets were 18, 24, 29, 32, 39, 49, 54, 60,000 passengers. Okay, so 60,000 was Flydubai for Europe with Emirates, the top 10, whereas Qatar Airways in that top 5 was 13, 18, 25,000 passengers. Now, look at the comparison that Ethiopian Airlines has. Ethiopian Airlines, their number one market for Zanzibar. John, take a guess.
Oh no, not again!
I'll give you one hint.
It's going to be in Europe.
Yes, it is in Europe. That market for Ethiopian carried almost double the number of passengers that the top 5 markets of Qatar Airways combined uplifted.
I'd like to think somewhere in Italy, because that's their their big link. Oh, yes. Get in finally after 23 episodes.
See, if you haven't picked up the fact that Italians go to Zanzibar yet, John, what are we doing?
Exactly. Yeah. I'd say we had Mr. Lamborghini at our dinner in Zanzibar. We know very well it's a big Italian link. Yeah, great. I'm dining out on that for the rest of the year, guys. So don't ask me any more questions.
So Milan was the number one feeder, 40,000 passengers. Number 2 was point to point with Addis. But the top 10 European routes: Milan 40,000, Rome 23,000, Frankfurt 19,000, Paris 18,000, Brussels 16,000, Vienna 15, and then Marseille and Moscow 10,000 each respectively. So what this tells you is,
forget with Rome, they also have that weekend third bank flight, which feeds Rome and Zanzibar. So there's a direct third bank connection from Rome as well, which was primarily set up for the Zanzibar and Mombasa weekend traffic out of Italy. I think we'll actually see the 2025 now, because that came in mid-year in 24. I think we'll see larger growth on that Rome traffic into Zanzibar and Mombasa from ET on the 25 numbers when we get them.
So just on these top 10 European routes, Ethiopian carried 141,000 passengers. What this tells you is that Europeans, though the Middle East carriers at times might be a bit cheaper, backtracking via the GCC to Zanzibar, they want to fly fast. They want to fly in a more convenient way and a more efficient way. And the numbers.
You're assuming that these passengers are making the decisions as independent travelers. I think there are way too many of these passengers are tour operators. And the tour operators honestly would fly you on a flying cockroach via Timbuktu if they could save €1. And I think ET is just coming in with more aggressive sales, marketing, pricing, capacity, flexibility, and everything else the tour operators want, which he can afford to do, because with the last mile leg, the Addis to Zanzibar leg being a shorter leg, ET can vary their capacity on anything from a 737-700 all the way to a 350-1000. And honestly, I've seen them fly both. In fact, I have flown on both on the Zanzibar route with ET. They go really small and they go really big. And that is not a luxury which an Emirates or a Qatar or an Etihad has to do that, because of the way their fleet and their rotations are structured. So I think that is where ET really has the benefit, that, being a closer hub with the ability and the way their scheduling works to be able to swap in the capacity as per demand. But that also means to be able to offer the capacity to the tour operators as I wouldn't say an open book, but with huge amounts of flexibility, which the other guys simply cannot offer the way their business is structured overall. So I think that is why ET is dominant, less so in terms of elapsed time. Because the elapsed time is a couple hours here and there. And honestly, we have seen historically that a few hours of elapsed time in what is a long haul vacation market does not make a difference in terms of driving demand from one player to another. It's price, which price and flexibility, because obviously flexibility comes at a price with the tour operator level. But I think that is really what's driving it. And if we want to come into the Etihad side over here, and I think it's good that you've been mentioning these numbers, because the reality is this is a seasonal flight in an A320. Give or take, this is barely 6,000 seats each way over the entire course of the season. We're not talking a huge amount of capacity. Given the numbers that you're talking there, that even if they sold every single seat as an OND, that wouldn't even put them in the top 10 markets there. So this is a niche player. It is dipping their feet in the water to test it. It's probably more driven to drive their loads out of the European origin points rather than it is to really make the money on Zanzibar. This is a case of, look, we've got more capacity into a Milan or whichever one of the source markets that are going to Zanzibar has capacity that needs to be filled. And they're just like, where are these people going? Oh, Zanzibar, let's put in an A320 4 times a week into Zanzibar, rather than in terms of let's focus on Zanzibar as a market in itself. I think that is a very big difference in terms of what they are doing so far. But as we said, as we have discussed, as I've discussed with Etihad in recent weeks as well, some of the players over there, Etihad needs to develop and refine and have a coherent Africa strategy. And I think given the fact that they've got a large order book of Airbuses coming in, 321 LR narrow bodies coming in, that opens up the potential to fly to a lot of different parts in Africa more cost efficiently than they have been able to in the past, and to have a coherent strategy surrounding it. I think Etihad in the past, under the James Hogan administration, was again a bit of an Air Tanzania type half plane, fly plane kind of strategy rather than anything with a coherent long-term thing. They're trying to put together something over there that is more coherent. At least their financial results seem to show that they are, or at least claim to show that they are doing a lot better than they have in the past. 30 new destinations for the year, whether that's going to last.
Is that the most of any airline for this year? 30 is
crazy. I cannot
so.
doubt that anybody has tried to do more than 30 in a year. I think
But
that's just
they've not
crazy.
opened
But
all
hey,
30. They've not opened all 30 this year.
No, they're not open all 30. They've announced
No, I mean,
30,
this one's next year, right?
Yeah,
This
okay,
one's next year.
they've actually opened 20-something of them, and I think that's bad
that's
enough.
still
So,
very
I
good.
mean, honestly, I will give them kudos for having the chutzpah to even attempt to do 30 destinations in a year. And I've told them that. I've told them to their face, you're crazy, in the nicest possible way. But yeah, I'm glad to see at least a few African destinations in that. Zanzibar may be more mainstream than El Alamein, their other African destination of the year, which was the most obscure one for those who are not fans of World War II history.
And I'm hoping that obviously we can get them along to AviaDev next year, because they've not actually ever been. And if they're going to look at their Africa strategy, then they should be coming down and seeing what the destinations have got to offer.
Chat with them, as I told you, John. I'm really hopeful that we will get one of the guys from there. And I hope you'll be listening, because I sent them the link to the podcast and I said I'm going to be giving them a shout out on this week's podcast. So guys, come.
Yeah, you've got the invite. Also, you know where I am.
Sign up. You've got the invite in your inbox. So we hope to see you in Botswana. Not that you'll be able to fly the 321 LR to Botswana, but you know what? It's a good market. Sign an interline with Airlink. You have a strategic partnership with Ethiopian. It's on your code share list potentially. You've got options.
Lovely. Behramjee, last word on this one.
Yes, but now something interesting also in Zanzibar is that the market that Kenya Airways caters to is completely different from these three carriers in terms of their top ONDs. The number one market is also from Europe for obvious reasons, but it has a better spread. Okay, KQ's number one market is Paris into Zanzibar, 47,000 passengers. Their second biggest market is Johannesburg, 36,000 passengers. Then point-to-point Nairobi, 34,000. Then London, 13. Then Amsterdam, 10. And then JFK. JFK is 5,000, followed by Entebbe and Cape Town at 7 and 5,000 each respectively. So KQ has a more diverse spread than Ethiopian, but their Paris to Zanzibar number is quite impressive, because it's more than a 40% market share that they have. on that route. So yeah, so what I'm trying to say
I
is
think a
that
lot of that is driven by the Air France code share.
oh yes,
Because
oh
Air
yes,
France
for
is
sure.
code sharing.
Yeah, for sure. What I would like to say is that I don't disagree fully with Etihad starting Zanzibar again, but I think 4 times a week is a bit too much for them initially. I think 3 times a week is more than enough, but they should be aware that just because they have their connections to Europe, they should not expect the volume to be there as they anticipate in their business case study. That's what I'm just trying
All
to
right.
say. But they
All
will
right.
definitely stimulate point-to-point demand from Abu Dhabi, which is barely nothing right now. But it will invigorate their interest because also Zanzibar is a halal place, so the local Emiratis will appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We said, oh yeah, it won't be as long this month, the podcast, and it is already incredibly long, and there's still quite a lot to go. So we might actually split this into 2 parts. We'll do a couple. Yeah, the deep dive hasn't even arrived yet, and we're an hour and 10 minutes in, so we'll see how this goes. I think a really quick one, because I think this was alluded to, is staying in Zanzibar and Mombasa as well, is RwandAir have obviously upgraded that flight to a 737-800. We thought that was going to happen all along. There's nothing particularly exciting to say there, is there? Just rather than...
No,
It's
it's just
something
that
that mentioned when we first mentioned that RwandAir was going to be doing their Mombasa-Zanzibar flight and on a Dash 8. I think one of the things we both said was it's a matter of time before that becomes a 737 instead. And sure enough, before the flight has even started operating, it has been upgraded to a 737-800. Yeah, we told you, and I think that's a slam dunk. RwandAir is marketing the hell out of their Mombasa-Zanzibar flights in the UK market in particular, to the point that I've actually had multiple people say that, oh, do you know that RwandAir flies directly? I'm like, they don't fly directly. They actually fly by Rwanda to that. But RwandAir's marketing seems to be focused in the UK now on Zanzibar and Mombasa on RwandAir rather than Rwanda on RwandAir for some, well, because that's where they're really going to drive a winter demand, I think. People don't go to see gorillas over the winter as much as they want to go to the beach.
Hi everyone, it's John here, just jumping in to say that yes, as I alluded to, we are splitting this into 2 sections. So in part 2, which is also available now, we're going to start with a deep dive on the New York Africa market, what Turkish Airlines' brand new order means for Africa potentially, new aircraft arrivals for both TAG, Malawi Airlines, and of course United Nigeria's deal to take on some ex-Southwest 737s, and much more laughs and information. So hopefully you can join us for part 2, available now. See you over there.